Rumphius was born in a very small town in Germany, in the state of Hesse. Um, his father was an architect and what we would call today probably a contractor. He was born during the 30 Years' War. Um, he was a Protestant, which of course is extremely important in those days. So you get, he went through the battles between the Catholic, the Counter-Reformation forces and the Protestant forces, um, to get away from that very narrow uh, social environment, which is excruciatingly small and claustrophobic. The only way he could get out in those days was to become a soldier, and he did. He volunteered, and he was hoodwinked. I mean, they lied to him. He volunteered to go to Venice, and he wound up on a ship going to Brazil, because the guys who conscripted him shanghaied him. He, not only him, but the whole slew of Hessian soldiers. And instead of going to the Mediterranean, they wound up in northern Holland on a boat. What was it? 1, 2, 3 ships that were on their way to South America and Brazil, because the Dutch West Indies Company needed troops and bodies to fight the Portuguese there. Now the ship that he was on shipwrecked, never got to Brazil, shipwrecked off the coast of Portugal. So he wound up in Portugal as an 18-year-old who didn't know anything from anything, uh, totally lost, and became a hireling, a mercenary for the Portuguese army for about 4 years. And then how he got from Portugal back to Germany, I have no idea. I have not been able to find anything. I have a suspicion he got bought out. It might well be his father bought him out. Anyway, he got back to Germany from Portugal. The father had always worked because he was an architect, and his specialty was restoring fortresses. And of course, they had all been wrecked through the 30 Years' War. So he always had work, except nobody paid him because they didn't have a cent to their name. Aristocracy, there were a bunch of flea-bitten nobodies, in terms of money. So the man never had any money, and the Rumphius on his mother's side had connections with the higher echelon in Holland, and those people on his mother's side had connections with the Dutch East India Company, and so when he signed up 1 grade higher than he should have been, and I think it's because of his mother's family. And wound up then he signed the standard 5-year contract with the Dutch East India Company, and wound up in Java, and but he didn't stay there very long, because just at that time they needed a large body of troops to go to the Moluccas, because there was a war going on there between the Dutch and the Moloccan people. Anybody who had just come in to the Indies was immediately grabbed. And Rumphius one of that's why he wound up in the Eastern Archipelago and never left again. He never saw Java again. He never saw other parts of Asia, and he never went back to Europe. So all of a sudden, he didn't know this, but for over half of his life, he was in the Eastern Archipelago.
And how was he blinded?
Probably cataracts. He clearly started work already describing these plants just about from the moment that he came there in 1657 to eastern Indonesia. And in the beginning it was kind of haphazard. I figured what happened was that people brought him plants for which he either paid or it was given to him, and then he would immediately sit down and describe them to whatever his ability, whatever he had. The 17th century Holland is an extraordinary, it's a long story, it's an extraordinary success story of the modern world starting in 17th century Holland. What you and I now live started in Holland in the 17th century. And Holland was really the premier country the flag bearer of new ideas in the intellectual world. The most important intellectual forces of the time, Descartes and Spinoza, were both. Spinoza was Dutch, 100%,
Yes.
and Descartes lived in Holland most of his life, wrote all of his major works there. And Holland permitted these ideas to be floating around, because if you tried them in, let's say, France, you were either locked up or they chopped your head off. They achieved something that nobody else did before or after. They managed to get the monopoly on the three major spices that would make somebody or a country filthy rich. Because, if you fill up a hold of a ship with cloves, that is a hell of a lot of cloves. So you only need one ship to get through, with a complete complement of cloves, and you were set for, for life.
And what are the other spices?
Nutmeg and mace.
Which is the same thing.
Yeah.
The same parts of the same plant. Yeah.
And then they finally got also the cinnamon when they conquered Ceylon. So that they had them all four.
Sri Lanka. Ceylon.
They began to realize that going back and forth the trade with Europe was not that lucrative, so that they started developing inter-Asian business connections, and that became extremely profitable. So that they could trade between China, Japan, Thailand, Cambodia, Ceylon, of course, very important, India. As long as they stayed within Asia, they could make an incredible amount of money. So the VOC was very rich, and they also, and since the people who were in charge were all very, very interested in botany or in natural history, if you like, they backed people like Rumphius quite easily. They were glad to do it. That, by the way, that sentiment and that passion for nature kind of disappeared in the 18th century. But in the 17th, it was very much there, and so that they very, they didn't mind supporting Rumphius, and they were very, very diligent and conscientious. They supported him with what we would call probably secretaries, so that he could dictate his work. The only thing, of course, that you find amazing is that how the hell did he remember all of this? But you see, he's just at the tail end of that remarkable, 2-3 centuries when people had still this ability to remember, to memorize.
Well, they trained.
Unbelievable. That's
Trained.
right. Like the memory palace of Matteo Ricci. The Jesuits did that. You were trained to do this, and he was just at the very end of that. So that I think that's why he could remember this unbelievable amount of information.